Hey fellow YouTubers, it's Frank Bush here. I just thought I'd show you some of the things out of my 2015 camping adventure. I did a video on the bark basket. You can see it's closed up a bit naturally on its own. You can still open it though and adjust, fill it. I was stocking it with a bunch of rope I had made. I'll come to that in a second. So this stuff is cedar root cordage. In order to make this, I pulled some cedar roots out of the ground. I skinned off all the dark colored bark that's on them, and you can see it becomes like a lighter color underneath. So what I did then was took the roots and peeled them and turned them into kind of pieces, if you will, and then they were just braided together. You can see that even for a small piece of rope, it's fairly strong. I found when working with larger cordage, like cedar roots, that to do the other rope method, instead of braiding, where you kind of turn them both one way and then turn the whole set the other, when doing that, you can make a cordage, but it doesn't seem quite as strong. I mean, this is still fairly thin, but you can see there's good tensile strength, there's good flexibility. When you're using cedar cordage, you always want to kind of soak it first to make sure it's more pliable before you go and use it. When it dries out, it'll tighten up, so whatever you knot this onto, as it dries, it'll just cinch onto the item. So these are a few different small sample pieces. I have some really kind of young raw pitch here. It's still very sticky, and that's off of the pine tree. So when you go to a pine tree, you'll see the sap coming off. Some trees, the majority of this was off a single tree, where the tree had bled, if you will, fairly significantly. It's still very young, it's very pliable. I'll talk about that further in a minute. But you can use the pitch on rope. I've put a bit on here as a sample if you want to kind of weatherproof it a bit. Right after you soak it and right before you're about to use the rope, put on a layer of pitch, and it'll kind of seal things in and make it far more weather resistant when it actually gets put into its place for whatever knot you're using it for. This is probably the largest piece to show you. This was a single root I pulled out of the ground that was roughly about 10-12 feet long. Sorry, just a bit of knotting going on here. So you can see it turns into, if you are braiding, if you're using the braiding style, as you run out of a piece and it becomes short, it's the standard braiding, where you kind of, one over the other, as you would braid hair or anything else. The trickiest part is really splitting the roots into these separate pieces. You got to take your time when you're doing it, and if the one side gets thicker than the other as you're peeling it down, you got to bend the thick side. That'll allow it the line that you're splitting to pull back into the center again. But needless to say, simple braiding. This I've already put into a bit of water. It's about 10-12 feet long, and well, you can see it's very, very strong material and makes a very durable rope. Because it's cedar, it has mildew resistance and other things. It's already naturally weather resistant. So that's enough about the cordage. I always recommend to go out and try to do this a couple times and get a feel for it. For if you're ever in a wilderness situation and you're in any type of pine forest or cedars or spruce. Spruce is always a good one. Any of the evergreen kind of trees, they normally make excellent cordage. I always recommend soaking it, and I prefer doing the braided method to give it a bit more flexibility but still maintain the strength. So as a separate kind of topic, this pine pitch I alluded to earlier, this is like a green moss that grows on pine trees. If you're ever in the Northwest, you'll see this. Pine pitch is a very flammable material, and so is this. I didn't do it in the video because I wanted to show you as the two separate entities, but if you kind of break this up into small chunks while it's still gooey and wet, and you do the same with the green moss and you mix them together. This stuff is probably the best natural fire starter you're ever going to have. You can then pack that into a container and carry it. It's even moisture resistant because of the pitch. But yeah, kind of break them all up and mix them together and then it'll dry. This is older pine pitch, which is much harder. You can't really mix into that as much. There's still a little bit of flexibility to this stuff, but it is very hard. This stuff you can break off pieces, you can chew it and use it as like a breath freshener. While the pine pitch is still in a young state like this, if you melt it in a container and you take some charcoal from a fire and mix it together, you make yourself a very durable glue. So you've got fire starters, you've got glue, you can make gum out of it. Even if you digest this, it's high in vitamin C and there's some sugars in it, so for bush kind of nutrients, if you will, you always have to worry about calories in and calories out. It's probably one of the easy things to just kind of give you a little boost. One other thing I made, which is kind of connected to the rope, but I made a wooden needle. I don't know if you can see that very well in the camera, but I made some natural cordage. I made a wooden needle. This needle serves kind of two purposes really. I'll just pull the cordage off. As you can see, nice little needle. It's got a fairly good point on it, but it's still a little bit dull. When making things like bark baskets, while it's still wet, when you're wanting to pop the holes, you can literally sew cordage through that you've pulled out of roots as well. In this example, I had used willow. You don't necessarily have to use willow. But one of the other good things about having a little stick like this that's bent with a point and everything else, you can also use this for, and there's videos on it, for deadfall traps, where in essence you would have a stick, here, let me show you a kind of improv example. If I had a stick, I can set some food on this hook, and normally that's aimed in, and when the animal pulls at the food, the other stick gets shook loose and it would fall. There's videos on the two-stick deadfalls. I'm not going to relive the entire example now, but one of the good little primitive tools you can use, like I say, throw it into your bark bag if you've made one of those and you're just kind of starting with no gear and want to build stuff up. And that's really what I started to do. Once I got my bark basket together, I started making some cordage. All of this stuff can easily fit inside this container. Same with the fire starter. I've got, I did some flint knapping. I know this is probably hard to see, but I've got a stone that's got a really nice edge on it for, I plan on making a stone knife out of that. That might be a separate video. But I still got a bit of work to do on the stone, and I just ran out of time on the holiday. But yeah, that's about all I have to show you at this point in time. Well, I'll try any of these things out and see how they work out for you and let me know. Cheers.